when we get back to Parliament in terms of sittings as of next week, early next week. At this point, unfortunately, we're not in a position to share with you a text of what the rules would be, because they need to first be seen by the appropriate structures. As I say, the Rules Committee itself would have a meeting on Tuesday afternoon at 2 o'clock in order for it to have a look at the work that would have been done by this time at a technical and other levels, because as you know, the subcommittee of the Rules Committee met yesterday. So we want to correct a misunderstanding we have picked up within the media, where as South Africans call in to certain radio stations, we detect a total misunderstanding of what is behind this exercise that we are embarked on. There's a tendency to cast the issues that have necessitated this exercise as being about not allowing members of Parliament to express a different view, which in fact really is perhaps the other way around. If you had watched the incident on the day of the President's questions, we adjourned the House in order to allow the whips of all parties to meet, to look at the situation, to apply their minds collectively, and to come back. And we allowed them, when they were back in the House, to express their views in the open, which we hadn't been told before they did that in the House, in the full glare of the South African society. We received from all the whips who got up in the House a clear position and view that they totally were against what had happened, which was the disruption of the President being able to answer questions. And they felt very strongly that they had to make it clear that even though some of them were saying yes, they would have a view that says the President maybe should pay, or whatever the view that they had. But what they were against was that the position in relation to the business of that particular day was disrupted by one of the opposition parties. So as we went into the Rules Committee, which we then convened, as I said earlier, those parties again very strongly made it clear they needed a protection from the insistence of one party to disrupt the business of the House, and therefore block them to also exercise their right to represent those who had voted for them to come and play a role in Parliament. And so the work that would have happened between then and now, as we are going back to Parliament, is work that is based on the fact that the majority of the parties expressed themselves in that Rules Committee and made it clear that they needed rules to protect their right to play their role in Parliament as having been elected by the South African electorate. So basically those are the issues. It's not about the fact that there's a particular view taken by others and that we're trying to block them from expressing their right. It's more a question of, yes, having allowed that view to be expressed, but recognizing and respecting the rights of other MPs who had a different view under the circumstances. So, in fact, it is anticipated that On the 28th, the Rules Committee will receive a report on what is being proposed. What are the amendments to the rules that are being proposed? And then that would then be amended, the text would be amended and taken to the House for adoption by the plenary. In other words, it is that test of the actual voting in the House that will tell us how the parties, how the balance is in terms of the views of the political parties that are participating in Parliament, in terms of the issues that are before us at the moment. Because it cannot be that because you scream loudest, you are able to have people pay attention to you. You are necessarily voicing the views of everybody who's participating within Parliament, and therefore you are the one with the correct view. I'm talking about the different political parties that are participants in the process of parliamentary work. So it really was to make sure that we make that clear, that the work we are doing is about ensuring that the rules are enabling all participants, all political parties, all members of Parliament to express their views, not just a particular tendency or those that have a particular perspective as to how they play their own role in Parliament. So basically, that's what we thought we should put at the disposal of the members of the media, so we enable them when they report on these matters to have that particular context of what it is that had happened and what we are now doing. The last thing I want to mention is that the process of amendment of rules, anyone who had listened to our budget vote speech would know that we did talk about this matter, that there has been a process. And the process, of course, had started in 1994, where at the dawn of the new South Africa, indeed there were rules that had always been there in the previous dispensation. And we did look at them as the new people who were players in a new dispensation that was beginning to unfold. We, of course, over time had retained most of the rules. We had tinkered with some rules, and it was during the time of the fourth Parliament that Parliament revisited the issue of the rules. And indeed, a subcommittee had been formed then under the leadership and guidance of the previous presiding officers. But because of just the nature of the amendments to the rules, the process, how many steps, and how, in fact, there are consultations and interactions that are very involved and don't, in their very nature, take maybe a week or two. It has taken a long time, and the Fifth Parliament has continued with that process, and we believe we should be through with putting before everybody the whole rule book, which is 15 chapters, in an amended form. So we think that before the end of the year, we should be able to be back to everybody about the areas around which we have amended the rules, and we believe, because of course that process is a multi-party process. So you would see the debates in the subcommittee, which is a multi-party structure, but in the end, from that subcommittee, they go to the main rules committee, which is in fact the constitutional body, and you then adopt them there, and finally you take them to the House. So the amendments we are going to be taking to the House on the 30th is not yet the whole rule book. The whole rule book we are continuing tightening up, and before the end of the year we are determined that we would be able to finish and actually put before the House all the 15 chapters of the rules. But we would have also, at that point, had the other House, excuse me, that we would have had the National Council of Provinces also look at their rules, and we would have together looked at the joint rules and finally be able to adopt the new rules comprehensively of Parliament. So with that clarification and the apologies, that really is the end of my remarks, unless there are questions that we need to clarify. Thanks.
Thank you, Speaker.
Thank you, Speaker. For the clarification, ladies and gentlemen, we open the floor now to questions that you may have, that you may want to raise with the Speaker. Okay. Do you have a roving mic? Okay. I'm told that whoever wants to ask a question should go to Ms. Jones. Can you put your hand up, please? Then Ms. Jones, with a mic there, that you can speak into to raise your question, so that it can be audible enough for all of us to hear. Okay, please identify yourself, just state your name and the media house you represent, and then you can raise your question.
Okay, good afternoon. My name is Ntebo Mukowa. I'm with the SABC. Yes, Speaker, you said that in the 15-chapter rule book, there are some laws that, or some rules that have to be changed. I wish I could know how many of them have to be changed, and how many of them, all in all, that you think are fine, you're fine with them.
Shall we take a round of questions?
Let's take a round.
Okay. We'll take a round of questions, just in case there are related issues also, so that the Speaker can respond to issues comprehensively. Yes, sir.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Speaker. Barry Bateman, Eyewitness News. I realise you've said to us that you won't be able to tell us exactly what rules are being amended or whatever the proposals are at this stage, because they still have to go to the next stage in the process. But perhaps you could enlighten us in how specific rules would be changed to facilitate or enable or to stop the kind of disruptions that we're seeing in Parliament, where you would call for order and such a call would be blatantly ignored and you would continue to be challenged and it just doesn't stop. What rule could possibly be changed that would discourage that kind of behavior in the House? Thank you.
Very final question for this round.
Speaker, Slee from Jacaranda FM News. I just wanted to know if the committee has also been looking at the question of police presence in the House, whether that was also looked into or discussed.
Thank you. I suppose we can take those three questions and then give Speaker an opportunity to respond to the issues raised.
On the first question of the numbers of the rules that are being changed and other details around that, unfortunately, we don't have that detail with us. And I know you are raising the question about the whole rule book, in other words, the 15 chapters. We can, of course, give you that detail. I can promise you in a few days' time, once we're back in Parliament, we can definitely get you that. You see, though, perhaps it would clarify the kind of amendment that would arise over time. You see, when we arrived in Parliament 21 years ago, the rules had been developing over, decades. for the longest time that South Africa has had a parliament. But as you would appreciate, the situation or the parliaments or the context was totally different then. And the rules have to take into account the realities that Parliament is dealing with, and in fact, the fact that there's even a change in cultural outlook in terms of the collective of South Africans that have since come to Parliament, would also be what determines the kinds of discussions that would have to be held in terms of agreeing rules. Because remember, rules don't come from heaven. It's the people concerned who must engage, interact, look at issues together, and agree on a particular approach. So I think I just want to also offer that particular comment and say, of course, we can give you the details when we're back in Parliament. What kind of rule would dissuade members from being disruptive? I think if people don't want to cooperate or are determined to continue to be disruptive, you actually cannot do anything about that. But what then is the next issue is, in order that you don't disable the institution and all elected members who are not interested in that disruptive activity, how must you take this issue that is being considered forward? And therefore, the question becomes, if a person is continuously disruptive and therefore are not interested in allowing Parliament to continue with its business, would they then kindly leave the House? That is the issue. And if they are unable to, or they refuse to leave, that can no longer be a matter of we are allowing them or they have a right to do and express themselves the way they would have been doing in a manner that is disruptive to other members. Because even the Bill of Rights in the Constitution provides for a limitation. You have a right, but to the extent that your right limits other people from exercising their right to do the job that they've come to do, then we take a different look at the extent to which you can be said to have a right to continuously be disruptive. Because the Bill of Rights doesn't say you can carry on exercising your right simply because you feel you have a right. But there are other people whose rights must also be protected. So that's the basis of the approach in terms of looking at what then needs to happen in order for other people to exercise their right to do their job and for Parliament to deliver on its constitutional duty. Somebody, I think the last question was about whether any discussion had happened about the presence of police. There was no specific mention of police, but what had been discussed, in fact, last year, already when we had had certain incidences, was the need, and in fact this discussion happened in a body called the Parliamentary Oversight Authority, which is a multi-party body, had discussed the need for Parliament to beef up its capacity to remove those that would prove to be an obstruction to the work of the House, the work of members of Parliament. And this was an approach that was agreed by all parties that participate in the Parliamentary Oversight Authority. It has been repeated, that discussion has been repeated when we came back this year. And in fact, in the Rules Committee that I made reference to after the last incident of blocking the President from answering questions, where in particular opposition parties were expressing themselves very strongly that it cannot be that they are repeatedly blocked from doing their job. The view was taken that it was necessary to agree that there would probably have to be an agreement broadly without looking at detail of getting the next possible way of indeed raising the capacity of Parliament to remove those who are disruptive. But secondly, that in the longer term, what Parliament had to do was definitely to capacitate, if it needed training of people that are there, to actually train them, but to get the level of capacity in strengthening Parliament to deal with incidents of disruptions.
Thank you.
Well, Parliament's presiding officer, Baleka Mbete, briefing the media there on how the institution will give support to the National Assembly when it resumes after the winter break. And what we're seeing there is just media asking various questions about specific rules and how, for example, unruly members of Parliament will be dealt with. And Baleka Mbete just saying that clarity on exact rules will be made clear throughout when Parliament reconvenes after the winter break.
Is set up for lunch. So all of us are invited to have lunch. Thank you very much for attending the first meeting of the day.